The morning sun spilled golden light across the schoolyard as students bustled through the gates, some chatting excitedly, others rushing to class. Among them was a young girl who stood out, not for her clothes or the way she carried herself, but for the striking beauty of her natural hair. Her tight curls framed her face like a crown, radiating confidence and individuality. She was proud of her heritage, her identity, and her natural beauty, traits she believed should be celebrated, not shamed. But not everyone saw it that way. The bell had just rung, signaling the start of another school day. Teachers greeted students, and the familiar hum of lockers slamming and footsteps echoed through the hallways. As the girl walked toward her classroom, she felt eyes on her, some admiring, others filled with silent judgment. She'd grown used to it. Her natural hair often drew attention, but she never let it bother her. She believed in staying true to herself, no matter what. Today, however, something was different. When she entered her homeroom, the teacher paused mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing slightly. A few students exchanged whispers, their voices hushed but not inaudible. "Why does she wear her hair like that?" One muttered, the words cutting through the girl like a cold wind. Still, she sat down, head held high, determined not to let the stares or whispers ruin her day. It wasn't until midway through the morning that things took a shocking turn. During a class break, the girl was summoned to the principal's office. Her heart raced as she walked down the long corridor, each step echoing louder in her mind. She tried to think of a reason she'd be called in. She was a good student, polite, hardworking, never causing trouble. What could this be about? When she stepped into the office, the principal sat behind a large wooden desk, his expression unreadable. The air was tense, and she could feel her palms growing clammy. He gestured for her to sit, and she complied, her mind racing with possibilities. Then, without warning, he said the words that would leave her stunned. "Your hairstyle is against school policy." Her stomach dropped. For a moment, she thought she must have misheard him. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "The school has a dress code," the principal continued, his tone firm but not unkind. "And your hair, while lovely, doesn't comply with the standards we've set." Her mind reeled. Standards? What standards? The school handbook didn't specifically mention natural hair or anything remotely close to it. She had read it cover to cover. How could her natural hair, something she was born with, something that represented her culture and identity, be against policy? She tried to reason with him, her voice calm but resolute. "This is my natural hair," she explained. "It's not dyed, styled inappropriately, or disruptive in any way. It's just me." But the principal wouldn't budge. He handed her a written notice and informed her that she was being suspended until she agreed to correct her hairstyle. The words felt like a slap in the face. Correct. How could something natural need correcting? The girl walked out of the office in a daze, the weight of injustice pressing heavily on her shoulders. By the time she reached the parking lot, tears stung her eyes. She couldn't understand how something as simple and as beautiful as her hair could cause such an uproar. She wasn't hurting anyone. She wasn't breaking any rules. So why was she being punished? Word of her suspension spread quickly through the school. Some students were outraged, others indifferent, and a few even supported the decision, claiming that rules were rules. The girl, however, wasn't about to back down. She knew deep in her heart that this wasn't just about hair. This was about more, a fight for fairness, for acceptance, for the right to be herself without apology. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. At home, her family rallied around her, offering comfort and encouragement. Her mother, a strong woman who had faced her own battles with prejudice, reminded her that standing up for what was right wasn't always easy. "You have a voice," she told her daughter, "and you have every right to use it." The girl decided to do just that. She began researching similar incidents, realizing she wasn't alone in this fight. Across the country, There were countless stories of students being penalized for their natural hair, each one more heartbreaking than the last. But there were also stories of triumph, of people coming together to challenge outdated policies and bring about change. Fueled by a sense of purpose, the girl and her family decided to take action. They reached out to local news outlets, shared her story on social media, and even contacted advocacy groups. Within days, her suspension became the talk of the town, and then the nation. As the pressure mounted, the principal found himself in a difficult position. On the surface, he had been enforcing school policy, but deep down, he began to question whether the policy itself was fair or even necessary. He started to see the bigger picture, to understand that this wasn't just about one student or one school. This was about systemic issues that had gone unchallenged for far too long. And then, one morning, something unexpected happened. The principal called an emergency assembly. Students and staff gathered in the auditorium, curious and slightly apprehensive. When the principal stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. He took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the crowd before finally resting on the girl, who sat in the front row with her family by her side. What he said next left everyone in shock. The principal gripped the edges of the podium, his face serious yet reflective. The room was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. His voice, steady but tinged with an unfamiliar vulnerability, carried across the auditorium. "I owe you all an apology," he began, his gaze sweeping over the students, teachers, and parents in attendance. "I made a decision recently that I believed was in line with our school policy, but I've realized that my decision, while technically correct, was not right." The girl's heart raced as the words sank in. Was this an acknowledgement of his mistake? She exchanged a glance with her mother, who gave her an encouraging nod. Still, she remained cautious. Words were one thing, actions were another. The principal continued, "This isn't just about rules or policies. It's about people. It's about understanding the unique challenges each of us faces and making sure that our school reflects the values of inclusivity, respect, and fairness." The crowd murmured in surprise. For someone who had always seemed so unyielding, this sudden shift in tone was unexpected. The principal's voice softened as he addressed the girl directly, his gaze locking with hers. "I understand now that what happened to you wasn't fair," he said. "Your hair is a reflection of who you are, your identity, your culture. It should never have been something you were made to feel ashamed of." The girl blinked, unsure how to respond. Was this a genuine attempt to make amends, or was it simply damage control in the face of mounting public pressure? She listened intently, her emotions a mix of hope and skepticism. The principal went on to explain the origins of the school's dress code. It had been implemented years ago with the intention of creating a professional learning environment, but no one had considered how such policies might inadvertently target specific groups of students. The guidelines had been written by people with limited perspectives, shaped by outdated ideas of conformity. As he spoke, the girl's mind wandered to her own experiences. She remembered the countless times people had made comments about her hair, some curious, others dismissive. Growing up, she'd often felt the pressure to straighten her curls or hide them under hats, just to avoid standing out. It wasn't until recently that she had embraced her natural hair, seeing it as a symbol of her pride and identity. Her journey hadn't been easy. She recalled late nights spent watching videos of women celebrating their natural beauty, learning how to care for her curls, and finding inspiration in their stories. It had taken years to unlearn the shame society had placed on her shoulders, to see her hair not as something to fix, but as something to cherish. And now, here she was, sitting in a crowded auditorium, the focus of a conversation she never expected to have on such a public stage. The principal paused, his expression heavy with regret. "I want to make this right," he said. "Starting today, we will review and revise our dress code policy with input from students, parents, and community leaders. I'm committed to ensuring that no one else feels marginalized or excluded because of who they are." The audience erupted into applause, but the girl remained quiet, her thoughts swirling. This was progress, no doubt, but was it enough? Changing policies was one thing. Changing mindsets was another. Over the next few days, the girl found herself at the center of conversations she never imagined having. Local news stations interviewed her, asking about her experiences and what she hoped to achieve. Students approached her in the hallways, some offering words of support, others sharing their own stories of feeling judged or misunderstood. One afternoon, a teacher pulled her aside after class. "You're incredibly brave," the teacher said, her voice filled with admiration. "What you're doing, it's going to make a difference, not just here, but everywhere." The girl smiled politely, but inside, she felt a weight she couldn't quite explain. She hadn't set out to be a symbol or a spokesperson. She just wanted to go to school, to learn, to be herself without fear of judgment or punishment. Yet now, it seemed, she was carrying the hopes and expectations of so many others who had faced similar struggles. Her family continued to stand by her, their support unwavering. Her mother, in particular, was a constant source of strength. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she reminded her daughter one evening. "But every step forward matters. What you're doing now, it's laying the foundation for a better future." As the days turned into weeks, the girl began to notice subtle shifts in the way people treated her. Some teachers went out of their way to compliment her hair, as if trying to make up for past insensitivity. Students who had previously avoided her now sought her out, eager to show their solidarity. But not everyone was supportive. A handful of students, and even a few parents, voiced their disagreement, claiming that the girl's actions were causing unnecessary division. "Why can't she just follow the rules like everyone else?" one parent had said during a school board meeting. The girl tried not to let the negativity get to her, but it wasn't always easy. Every now and then, doubt crept in, whispering that maybe she should have stayed quiet, avoided the spotlight. But then she'd think about the younger students who looked up to her, who saw her as proof that it was okay to be different. That thought kept her going. Meanwhile, the principal followed through on his promise. He organized a committee to review the dress code, inviting students, parents, and community leaders to share their perspectives. The girl was invited to participate, and though she was initially hesitant, she eventually agreed. She wanted to ensure that the new policies truly reflected the diverse experiences of the school's population. As she sat in those meetings, listening to people debate and discuss, she realized just how deeply rooted some biases were. But she also saw hope in the voices of students who spoke passionately about their identities, in the parents who advocated for fairness, and in the teachers who were willing to learn and grow. The process was slow, sometimes frustrating, but it was moving forward. And for the first time in a long while, the girl felt a glimmer of optimism. Change was coming. It might not be perfect, and it might not happen overnight, but it was happening. One evening, as she prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her curls framed her face, wild and free, a testament to her journey. She smiled, a quiet but determined smile, knowing that she had stayed true to herself through it all. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, she felt ready to face it, one step, one conversation, one act of courage at a time. The weeks that followed were some of the most challenging the girl had ever faced. The school committee meetings continued, each one more intense than the last. People from all walks of life shared their perspectives, some in support of change, others staunchly opposed. It was clear that this issue wasn't just about a dress code anymore. It had become a battle over values, identity, and what the school truly stood for. The girl attended every meeting, her presence quiet but powerful. She didn't always speak, but when she did, her words carried weight. She shared personal stories, not just her own, but also those of other students who had reached out to her. Stories of being told their natural hair was unprofessional or distracting. Stories of feeling like they had to hide parts of themselves just to fit in. Each story added fuel to the fire, building a case for change that was impossible to ignore. But with every step forward, there seemed to be new obstacles. Some parents began organizing protests, accusing the school of pandering to a select group of students. They flooded social media with posts demanding that the dress code remain unchanged, claiming it was essential for maintaining discipline and order. Their words stung, but the girl reminded herself that standing up for what was right often came with resistance. At school, the tension was palpable. Some students rallied behind the girl, wearing shirts with slogans like, "Natural is beautiful," and "Let us be us." Others avoided her altogether, wary of getting involved in the controversy. A few openly mocked her, whispering snide remarks as she walked past. One afternoon, as she was walking to class, a boy stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "You think you're so special, don't you?" he sneered, making a big deal out of nothing. Her heart pounded, but she refused to back down. "This isn't about being special," she said firmly. "It's about being treated fairly. If you don't get that, maybe you should educate yourself." The boy scoffed and walked away, but the encounter left her shaken. She leaned against her locker, taking deep breaths to calm herself. Moments like this tested her resolve, but they also strengthened her determination. She wasn't fighting just for herself. She was fighting for every student who had ever felt unseen or unheard. Meanwhile, the media attention continued to grow. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a larger conversation about race, identity, and equality in schools. Activists and celebrities began to weigh in, some praising the girl for her bravery, others calling out the broader issues of discrimination that still plagued society. One evening, as she scrolled through her phone, she came across a video from a woman who had faced a similar battle years ago. The woman spoke about how she had been suspended from her job for wearing her natural hair in braids, how it had nearly broken her spirit, and how she had eventually won her fight. "You're not alone," the woman said, looking directly into the camera, "and your voice matters more than you know." The girl felt a lump rise in her throat. Knowing that others had faced and overcome similar challenges gave her hope. It reminded her that she wasn't just a single voice in the wilderness. She was part of a much larger movement. But the backlash wasn't limited to the school or social media. One evening, her family received an anonymous letter in the mail. The words were cruel, accusing them of causing division and demanding that they stop pushing their agenda. Her mother read the letter silently, her expression unreadable. Then she tore it in half and tossed it in the trash. "People will say what they want," her mother said, her voice steady. "But that doesn't make them right. We know the truth, and that's what matters." The girl nodded, drawing strength from her mother's unwavering support. Still, the incident left her rattled. The stakes felt higher than ever, and the pressure was almost overwhelming. As the date for the final committee meeting approached, the school buzzed with anticipation. Everyone knew this was the moment when a decision would be made, whether the dress code would be revised or remain unchanged. The girl prepared herself for the meeting, gathering her thoughts and steeling herself for whatever was to come. When the day finally arrived, the auditorium was packed. Parents, students, teachers, and even members of the local community filled the seats, their faces a mix of curiosity, tension, and hope. The air was electric, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone in the room. The principal opened the meeting with a brief statement, acknowledging the importance of the discussion and the passion it had sparked. Then he invited speakers to share their final thoughts. One by one, people stepped up to the microphone. Some spoke in favor of change, their voices filled with emotion as they recounted personal experiences or expressed their support for the girl. Others argued against it, insisting that the dress code was necessary for maintaining discipline and order. When it was the girl's turn to speak, she walked to the front of the room, her heart pounding. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, their gazes a mix of expectation and skepticism. Taking a deep breath, she began. "This isn't just about hair," she said, her voice clear and steady. "This is about who we are as a community. Are we a place that values conformity over individuality? That tells students they have to change who they are to be accepted. Or are we a place that celebrates diversity, that makes everyone feel seen and respected? She paused, letting her words sink in. The room was silent, the tension almost unbearable. The room buzzed with mixed reactions. Some people nodded in approval, while others whispered in hushed tones, clearly unsettled by the revelations. But just as the girl began to feel a glimmer of hope, the principal's next words sent a chill down her spine. However, he said, his voice dropping, I must also inform you that during this process, there have been instances of misconduct, actions taken by individuals who sought to influence the outcome of these discussions in ways that were inappropriate. The murmurs grew louder, confusion and suspicion spreading like wildfire. The girl's mother placed a protective hand on her shoulder, her expression a mix of worry and determination. The principal looked directly at the girl now, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and resolve. I am deeply sorry to say this, but some of these actions involved people close to you. The girl froze, her breath catching in her throat. What was he talking about? Who could he mean? Before she could ask, a man in the crowd stood up abruptly. It was one of the parents who had been vocally opposing the dress code changes, a tall man with a sharp voice that carried across the room. This is outrageous, he shouted. You're trying to distract us from the real issue here. You're scapegoating people instead of taking responsibility for your failures as a leader. The principal didn't flinch. I understand your frustration, but this is not about placing blame. It's about addressing the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. The girl felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Who was the principal referring to? What actions had been taken, and how did they connect to her? As the tension in the room grew, a member of the committee stepped forward. She was a teacher who had always seemed kind and supportive, but now her face was drawn and serious. During our investigation, she said, her voice steady but heavy, we discovered evidence that some individuals attempted to fabricate incidents and spread false information to sway public opinion. These actions were not only unethical, but also deeply harmful to the students involved. The girl's head spun. Fabricated incidents, false information. None of this made sense. She thought back to the anonymous letter her family had received, to the strange looks and whispered comments in the hallways. Could this all be connected? Her mother leaned in, her voice low but urgent. Stay calm, she said. We'll get through this together. But the girl couldn't stay calm. She needed answers, and she needed them now. She raised her hand, her voice trembling but determined. Excuse me, she said, standing up. What exactly are you saying? Who did this? The room fell silent again, all eyes turning to her. The teacher hesitated, glancing at the principal before responding. We can't disclose specific names at this time, she said carefully. But I assure you, we are taking this matter very seriously. The girl sat back down, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story, more than what the principal and the committee were letting on. As the meeting continued, the girl's unease grew. The committee outlined their plans for the school's reform efforts, but she couldn't focus. Her thoughts kept circling back to the cryptic statements about misconduct and false information. When the meeting finally ended, the girl felt no sense of closure. If anything, she felt more confused and unsettled than ever. She and her mother stayed behind, hoping to speak with the principal privately, but he was quickly surrounded by other parents and reporters. On the way home, her mother tried to reassure her. We'll get to the bottom of this, she said. Don't let it shake you. You've done nothing wrong. But the girl couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something big. As they pulled into their driveway, she noticed a car parked across the street, its engine idling. A man inside seemed to be watching them, though he quickly looked away when she turned her head. Her mother noticed too, her expression tightening. Come on, she said, ushering the girl inside. The girl's unease deepened. She didn't know who the man was or why he was there, but she had a sinking feeling that the fight she thought was nearing its end was only just beginning. The girl couldn't shake the eerie feeling from the moment she entered her house. The memory of the idling car across the street gnawed at her, and though her mother tried to downplay it, there was tension in her every move. They locked the doors, drew the curtains, and turned off the porch light, but the unease lingered. The next morning, as she made her way to school, the air felt thick with anticipation. The whispers in the hallways were louder, the stares more lingering. Word of the principal's announcement had spread, and everyone seemed to be speculating about what might come next. But for the girl, the mystery surrounding the misconduct accusations loomed larger than the dress code itself. She was determined to find out who had been behind the fabrications, and why. Her opportunity came sooner than expected. As she entered the school library during her lunch break, she spotted a group of students huddled in a corner, their voices low but hurried. She recognized one of them as a boy from her class, someone who had always seemed more interested in staying out of trouble than getting involved in any sort of conflict. Yet here he was, glancing nervously around as he whispered something to the others. The girl approached cautiously, her heart pounding. "Hey," she said, startling them. The group froze, their expressions a mix of guilt and fear. "What's going on?" For a moment, no one spoke. Then the boy sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You might as well know," he said. "It's about everything that's been happening. The meeting, the principal, you." Her stomach twisted. "What about me?" He hesitated, looking at his friends for support, but they avoided his gaze. "Some of us heard things," he admitted finally, "about someone trying to make you look bad. They thought if they could discredit you, people would stop supporting the changes." The girl's breath caught in her throat. "Who?" she demanded. "Who would do that?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know for sure," he said, "but there's a lot of talk about one of the parents, someone who's been really vocal about keeping the dress code the way it is." Her mind raced. There had been several parents who had spoken out against her, but one stood out, a woman who had been especially adamant during the meetings, her voice sharp and cutting as she argued that rules were rules and that students needed to respect authority. Determined to uncover the truth, the girl decided to confront the principal directly. She waited until the end of the school day, then marched to his office, her resolve stronger than her nerves. When she entered, he looked up from his desk, surprised but not unkind. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I need to know the truth," she said, her voice firm. "About the misconduct. About who's been trying to sabotage this." The principal studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. She did, her heart hammering in her chest. "You've been incredibly brave through all of this," he began. "And I owe you honesty. What we discovered was that a parent had been spreading false rumors about you and even attempting to bribe members of the committee to vote against the dress code changes. It was a deliberate effort to undermine your credibility." The girl clenched her fists. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The principal hesitated. "It's not my place to name them publicly," he said, "but I can tell you that we're taking steps to ensure this doesn't happen again. The committee is aware, and the actions taken by this individual will not affect our decision." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was something. She thanked the principal and left, her mind still spinning. If the parent in question wasn't going to be named, she would have to figure it out on her own. That evening, as she scrolled through her social media, she noticed a new post from one of the parents who had been vocal during the meetings. It was a long, angry rant about how the school was caving to pressure and betraying its principles. But what caught her attention was a comment below the post, written by another parent. It was vague, but it hinted at insider knowledge of the committee's deliberations, information no one outside the meetings should have known. The girl showed the comment to her mother, who frowned deeply. "This isn't right," her mother said. "How would they know that unless someone was feeding them information?" Her mother's words sparked something in her mind. She remembered the anonymous letter they had received weeks earlier, the one filled with cruel accusations. At the time, They had dismissed it as the work of someone angry and unhinged. But now she wondered if it was connected. Could the same person who had sent the letter also be behind the rumors and bribes? Determined to get answers, she and her mother decided to bring the letter to the principal. He examined it carefully, his expression darkening as he read. "This could be significant," he said. "I'll pass it on to the committee for further investigation." As the days passed, the tension in the school reached a boiling point. The final committee meeting was fast approaching, and everyone knew the decision would shape not just the dress code, but the entire school culture. But behind the scenes, the girl couldn't shake the feeling that the person responsible for the misconduct was still out there, watching and waiting. Then, on the morning of the final meeting, an unexpected twist sent shockwaves through the community. The parent who had been suspected of spreading false information was revealed, not by the school, but by another parent who had grown tired of the lies and manipulation. In a dramatic public statement, they exposed the culprit as someone who had not only fabricated stories about the girl, but had also worked to silence other students who had spoken out in support of change. The revelation sent the community into an uproar. The parent in question denied the accusations, but the evidence was damning. It became clear that they had gone to great lengths to maintain the status quo, even at the expense of a student's reputation and well-being. At the meeting that evening, the atmosphere was electric. The principal began by addressing the revelations, expressing his disappointment and reaffirming the school's commitment to fairness and inclusivity. Then, finally, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. "We have voted," the principal announced, his voice steady. "And we have decided to update the dress code to ensure that it reflects our values of respect, equality, and individuality." The room erupted into applause. The girl felt tears spring to her eyes as relief and pride washed over her. It was a victory, not just for her, but for everyone who had fought alongside her. But just as the celebration began, the girl noticed something strange. In the back of the room, the parent who had been exposed was quietly slipping out, their face pale and their movements hurried. Something about it didn't sit right with her. She couldn't explain it, but she knew the story wasn't over yet. As the applause continued to fill the room, the girl's heart swelled with a mix of pride and relief. She had fought so hard for this moment, and now finally, it felt like all the pain and struggle had been worth it. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering, "You did it. I'm so proud of you." But the girl's eyes couldn't help but linger on the parent who was slipping out of the room. Something about their hurried exit felt unfinished, as if there was still more to uncover. She considered following them, but her mother gently tugged her back. "Let it go for now," she said. "You've already won where it matters most." The next few days felt like a whirlwind. The news of the dress code victory spread quickly, and with it came an outpouring of support from students, parents, and even members of the broader community. The girl found herself at the center of it all, her story becoming a symbol of perseverance and the importance of standing up for what's right. Still, there were lingering questions in her mind. About the parent who had tried to discredit her, about the anonymous letter, and about the deeper issues within the school that had allowed such behavior to persist in the first place. She couldn't help but wonder if the changes to the dress code would truly be enough to shift the culture, or if there were still battles left to fight. One afternoon, as she was walking home from school, a car pulled up beside her. For a moment, her stomach dropped, thinking back to the idling car outside her house days earlier. But when the window rolled down, she was surprised to see the boy from the library, the one who had first hinted at the rumors. "Hey," he called out, his expression hesitant. "Do you have a minute?" She nodded, stepping closer but keeping her guard up. "What's up?" He glanced around, as if to make sure no one was listening. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner. I knew something wasn't right, but I was scared. I didn't think it was my place to get involved." The girl studied him for a moment, her initial wariness softening. "It's okay," she said. "I get it. This whole thing has been a lot. But it's not just about me. It's about all of us. If we want things to change, we all have to be willing to speak up." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're right. And I want to help, if I can. I heard some things about the parent who tried to sabotage you. I think they were working with someone on the inside." "A teacher." Her breath caught. "A teacher. Are you sure?" He nodded. "I don't have proof, but I overheard something in the teacher's lounge. They were talking about how this whole thing got out of hand and how they didn't expect it to blow up like this." The girl felt a chill run down her spine. If a teacher had been involved, it meant the problem ran even deeper than she had realized. But before she could ask more, the boy's car drove off, leaving her with more questions than answers. Over the next week, the girl couldn't shake the thought of a teacher being involved. She kept her eyes and ears open, paying closer attention to the dynamics between staff members and students. It wasn't long before she began to notice small things: furtive glances, whispered conversations, and a general sense of unease among certain teachers whenever she was around. One day, she decided to approach the principal again. She told him about what the boy had said, her voice steady but insistent. "If there's someone on staff who was part of this," she said, "we need to know. The students deserve better than this." The principal listened carefully, his expression growing darker as she spoke. "I appreciate you bringing this to me," he said. "I'll look into it, but I need you to understand that this might take time. If someone on staff was involved, they'll have to be held accountable, but we need solid evidence." In the meantime, the girl focused on moving forward. With the dress code changes officially in place, she worked with other students to create a support group for those who had felt marginalized or excluded. They held meetings, shared stories, and brainstormed ways to make the school a more inclusive and welcoming place. The group quickly gained momentum, attracting students from all backgrounds and grades. Even some teachers joined in, offering their support and guidance. It felt like a new beginning, not just for the girl, but for the entire school community. Then, one afternoon, the principal called her into his office. His expression was a mix of relief and regret. "We've found something," he said, "a series of emails between a teacher and the parent who tried to discredit you. It's clear they were working together to spread false information and influence the committee's decision." The girl's heart sank. She had hoped it wasn't true, but deep down, she had suspected as much. "What happens now?" she asked. "The teacher has been placed on administrative leave while we conduct a formal investigation," the principal said. "The parents' involvement will also be addressed, but I want you to know that this doesn't reflect the values of our school. We're committed to making things right." The girl nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. It was hard to process that someone in a position of trust had been part of something so harmful, but she was grateful that the truth was finally coming to light. In the weeks that followed, the school continued to implement changes, not just to the dress code but to its overall approach to equity and inclusion. The girls' support group became an official student organization, and she was invited to speak at community events, sharing her story and encouraging others to stand up for what they believed in. As for the girl, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The road had been long and difficult, but she knew she had made a difference. And though the journey wasn't over, she was ready to face whatever came next with courage and determination. One evening, as she sat with her mother on their front porch, she looked out at the quiet street and smiled. "We did it," she said softly. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder, her own smile filled with pride. "Yes," she said, "but more importantly, you did it. You showed them what it means to stand tall, no matter what." The girl nodded, feeling the weight of those words. She had stood tall, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt unseen or unheard. And that, she knew, was something no one could ever take away.